The stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whisper in Darkness. I'm your host, the Man from Lang. Thank you very much for joining me today. On this episode, we are continuing with our review of the player cards in the Edge of the Earth Investigator expansion. This is part 3 of our look at the Survivor cards. This time around, we're going to look at Blood Will Have Blood, Fire Extinguisher Level 3, Plucky Level 3, and Fend Off. There are spoilers throughout if you care about that sort of thing. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Just a quick reminder of how we rate cards here on The Whisper in Darkness. The best of the best get an Elder Sign, while the worst of the worst get an Auto Fail, and the cards in between get a +1, 0, or Elder Thing respectively. Cards that you build around or are good in one particular investigator get a Bless token, while cards that we believe are destined to end up on the optional list of taboos or that are just bad for the game get a Curse token. Before we get started, I'd like to thank the patrons of this channel for their tremendous support. The Arkham Horror LCG community is amazing, and these people have gone above and beyond to bring you content like these reviews. If you'd like to support the channel's goals and see your name on this list, head over to patreon.com, sign up for a tier of your choice, and claim your rewards. That would be awesome. Special thanks to Cole Monroe Chitty for the tremendous art that graces the channel, Nicole Fiscus for the new Whisper in Darkness logo, and Nate Lost in Time and Space for the intro as well as the overlays. Thank you very much. I couldn't do it without you. Without further ado, let's get started. We are back with part 3 of our look at the Survivor cards in the Edge of the Earth expansion. We are going to start off with Blood Will Have Blood. It is a 1-cost event that costs 2 experience points, willpower, and combat skill icons, pact and cursed traits. It is fast. Play after an enemy attacks you. Max 1 per attack. Damage/horror from this attack cannot be assigned to ally assets. For each point of damage and or horror you took from this attack, draw 1 card. Obviously, the whole attacking you business... Obviously, this card was designed for investigators like Daniela, who don't mind being attacked and have abilities that work on being attacked. What do you guys think about this one? Nice art. I'll give it that.
Yeah, the artwork's very cool. I feel like outside of Daniela, this is pretty difficult to reliably trigger. Well, maybe not trigger, but get good value out of. You know, a lot of the enemy attacks that you want to take are probably like 1 in 1, or 2 of one particular, whether it's health or sanity. And if this card is basically netting you +1 for 2 experience and 1 resource, I feel like that's not really worth it. If you want card draw, I would suggest you probably play something like Nothing Left to Lose, which can draw you up to 5 and then gets you some additional resources, which can be really clutch. And it's only for 1 more experience. So I find this card pretty difficult to want to put in a lot of decks, but maybe Daniela likes it.
Well, even in Daniela, the fact that you can't have Peter Sylvester or Jessica Hyde or any of your allies, you can't have your guard dog, take any damage from this. So, like, if your game plan involves, putting damage on, say, Tetsuo Mori and using him to get you a card, then you can't do that with this. Yeah, I feel like it costs 2 XP and it has the downside of forcing you to not utilize your soak. I don't think this card's very good. Yeah.
I think the biggest problem with this card is that most enemies deal 1 damage and or horror at most. So most of the time you're only drawing 2 cards with this. And even in an investigator like Daniela, she has access to Glory, which costs no XP and has 2 intellect skill icons for a very low intellect investigator. So it's not like she has to spend the XP to get the card draw, and she doesn't have to be attacked for it. And I think traditionally, if you're being attacked, you are going to be relying on the soak from your allies. And at least in the Daniela build that I've been working on, I haven't really explored other types of soak. You can use, I think, Flesh Ward and stuff like that if you wanted to, but I haven't been using those types of cards. I could see some circumstances where I would like to have this card. I know in the Forgotten Age campaign, for example, with the Harbinger of Velusia who appears, Sometimes you end up in situations where you have no choice but to take an attack from him, just the way he operates. Sometimes he spawns on you, and sometimes he spawns at a location that is far from you and will come after you. And unless you can sort of rig the situation where you go to him, he will come to you and you're going to take 2 damage and 2 horror. So the ability to draw 4 cards off that would be pretty nice, but that's just for one campaign. And I feel like if I'm building a Daniela deck, at least in solo, discovering clues and getting weapons and stuff like that are going to be a higher priority than this. Granted, survivors don't have many ways to draw additional cards, until basically you've got Lucky Rabbit's Foot in the core set, and then Take Heart will get you a couple cards, but it's kind of hard to come by. Madame Lebranche will get you a card, but you don't have to, you can't have any cards to begin with. So card draw on survivors, fairly rare, but like you say, Nate, there is that one card that will gain you cards and resources. I think that one is only once per game, but that's, if you're looking to spend XP, that's probably better.
Yeah. It's like that once a game refuel is generally enough. While survivors don't have tons of card draw, you have tons of recursion and tons of effects that kind of act as card draw. So it's like, while you're not a seeker that's going to pile 15 cards in their hand, you're going to play a resourceful, and then that's going to get you another card. And you're going to have enough, generally speaking, to kind of facilitate your game plan. And playing a card like this sort of muddies the waters a bit. It's not really actively working towards your game plan. It's sort of like, oh, I took a bunch of damage, so now I get to get some benefit out of it. It's like, that's fine, I guess, but it's not helping you win the game.
Yeah, I'd play dodge instead of this, to be honest. Because you want to look at this card and be like, oh, sweet, I get attacked for the Harbinger. I draw 4 cards. Or you could just play dodge and not take 2 damage and 2 horror.
That is true. Yeah.
Yeah,
it's pretty tough. I don't know how many cards I'd want to get out of this. I mean, if you're only getting 2, you're basically just replacing blood. Blood will have blood. Mm-hmm. You're replacing blood and will have blood, and you're getting 1 card out of the deal. And I don't know if that's enough to warrant the amount of damage and horror you're potentially taking, that you're going to have to find a way to soak and or heal for this one. How do we rate Blood Will Have Blood?
I'm going to give this a tentacle. I don't think it's very good. If you're comparing this to something like Unexpected Courage level 2, Overpower level 2, those give you similar amounts of card draw, but also don't require you to take damage.
Yeah.
So when you think about it that way, this card really loses a lot of stock. It also costs 1 resource, which isn't a lot, but there are Dark Horse decks, and you're not going to want to have a resource for this, so this card's just awkward.
Yeah, if you have any other option for card draw, play that instead. And like you said, Mr. Lang, you have even just Glory will probably outperform this. Yeah, this is a tentacle. Don't play this. It's a trap.
I'm going to bump this just up to an Elder Thing solely on the art alone. I will probably never purchase this card for my deck. Like you say, Overpower 2 is a thing. I mean, Daniela can't take that, so that's unfortunate. But Yorick certainly could. And I think, besides Daniela, Yorick is probably the only other investigator I can think of offhand who you could build a tanky enough build with some of the survivor. Between the Survivor Soak and the Guardian Soak, you could take a lot of damage and horror and go. But again, Yorick can take Glory, so why spend the XP if you don't have to, right?
So why do you guys think that sentence there about the damage and horror not being allowed to be assigned to allies, why do you think that's there?
Here's Keepsake, Leather Jacket, something worth fighting for. Those are cards people play, so I guess you could assign damage to those things.
Yeah, and would that break the card if you could?
No. I don't even think putting damage on allies would really break the card. I think it's actually kind of more thematic because you're sacrificing a friend to get power.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, maybe it is just for thematic reasons. Maybe they just felt like just handing you cards for being attacked would be too good, so putting in that ally clause prevents that. I suspect that for thematic reasons is more likely that you do need to sacrifice somebody in order to get the cards, which is pretty dark for this game. I mean,
Oh, it says it can't be assigned to allies, so you can still put it on other soaks.
yeah,
Mhm.
true grit and something worth fighting for still works. So cherished keepsake, stuff like that still
Okay.
works. It's just allies that you can't assign it to. So
Huh.
the next card in the box is Fire Extinguisher level 3. It is a 2-cost asset with 2 agility skill icons, item, tool, and melee traits. As an action, you may fight. You get +1 combat and deal +1 damage for this attack. As an action, you may discard Fire Extinguisher, evade, automatically evade all enemies engaged with you. You may exile Fire Extinguisher instead of discarding it to discard each non-elite enemy evaded by this effect. And Fire Extinguisher takes up a hand slot. I was lucky enough to get a chance to spoil this card, which was originally released way back in the Miskatonic Museum Mythos pack. First Mythos pack for the game was Fire Extinguisher. I believe it's level 1, and it is often considered to be one of the worst cards in the game. I wasn't particularly impressed with this when I first saw it. There were some people who commented on that video that the ability for a survivor to pick up a weapon that deals +1 combat and +1 damage is very good. And then, unfortunately, you look at the rest of the set and you see a tremendous number of better weapons than this one. So you've got sledgehammers and you've got cyclopean hammers, and so I'm not sure why you'd be spending 3 experience points on this. And honestly, I think a lot of the survivor weapons are pretty decent anyway, like meat cleaver and baseball bat. So like I said in my initial preview of this card, I think that second ability is doing an awful lot of heavy lifting. What do you guys think?
I want to like this card, but, I think I would generally agree with you, Man from Lang. I think the survivors that want weapons either dip into their off class. Like York, for instance, probably takes a bunch of guardian weapons for the most part. And, I don't think any investigator like Rita or Ashcamp Pete is going to take a card like this. So it ends up kind of being a card that isn't really that appealing to a lot of investigators. And like you said, that second ability is really kind of the reason I feel like you're gonna purchase this card over another weapon. But at least it is consistent damage, and it's it doesn't take any ammo. It only takes up 1 hand slot, which is pretty nice, I guess, but I do think that at 3 experience, it's a little expensive.
Yeah, this feels like a 2 XP card. Like, the numbers aren't bad on it. The ability's not bad. I mean, I would actually think that the ability to automatically evade all enemies engaged with you, it's a nice get out of jail free card in solo play. I mean, because my experiences in true solo is that you get swarmed by 2 or 3 enemies and you're hosed. So it's nice to have something like on the table that will deal with it.
Yeah, and you don't have to make a skill test, so
yeah, exactly.
You get them off you and you can continue the scenario, which is pretty nice.
Yeah, like compared to Cunning Distraction, where you have to spend 5 and the only thing that does is evade everything engaged with you. Also compared to Survival Instinct level 2, where you have to make a successful evade check and then it evades everything engaged with you. At least this just works and there's no skill test involved and it's not 5 cost. It's not bad. I can see why it's not like overwhelmingly strong or anything like that, but it's not bad.
It is, I guess, worth mentioning that it does work against swarm enemies. A lot of those are non-elite. You can wipe out an entire swarm with this thing if you're willing to exile it. So if you're playing the Dream Eaters campaign, maybe this thing's stock goes up a little bit. In my solo experience, the occasions where I've been swarmed by tons of enemies are fairly rare outside of Dream Eaters, where you can sometimes end up with too many to handle. And I don't know if this does enough in multiplayer because it only affects enemies engaged with you. So that means you've either got to play a taunt to get all the enemies, or you've got to do something else before you can really help your group, because those enemies are going to just stick around, and if they have Hunter or whatnot, they're going to harass you for the rest of the game. And again, the discard only works on non-elites, which are most of the enemies you're going to run into, so it makes sense. This card just feels kind of meh to me. I don't know when I would want to buy it or play it. Certainly the original Fire Extinguisher never made it into any deck I ever played, and I did fine, so I'm hard-pressed to think of situations where I would want this card. And granted, 3 XP is at the top of the survivor curve for the most part, and you can buy an awful lot of other cards that do a lot at 3 XP in Survivor. How would we rate this one?
I'm dancing around a 0 and an Elder thing. If this was 2 XP, I'd be much more willing to give it a 0, but at 3 experience, it's tough. I get why it's at 3. They probably didn't want certain off-class survivors to have access to this card, which, sure, I guess, but I think I'm going to go with the Elder thing. It's just a little too niche, I think, for what you want it to do. It's going to feel a little lackluster, which is mainly use it as a weapon, and then I just don't think that second ability is generally worth the experience a lot of the time, but it is nice when you need it.
I see your point there, Nate. I think I'm going to give it a 0 because the 2 abilities, they're kind of, the numbers are fine on them. Yeah, it is. I think it does feel like a 2 XP card, but yeah, you got a weapon that deals 2 damage, and then you got a one-shot auto evade. Like I was saying, if you compare these to like Cunning Distraction or Survival Instinct, it's not bad to have this. So, and the fact that it also fights, it also can do damage, but also have that escape valve in the same card. I think that's in my experience. I think that makes it about a 0.
I think if the original is a tentacle, I think I'll bump this one up to an Elder thing. It's better. I mean, the numbers are okay on it. +1 combat and +1 damage is acceptable, and having that extra ability is nice, but honestly, I don't know when I'm buying this and playing this card in any deck. I find that generally there are other Survivor and off-class Survivor weapons that I'm going to go for over this, and I think Survivors already do really well with evasion. They typically tend to have, average to above average agility. So if you're playing in solo, it's been enough, to be honest, and there are other options that you can pick up if you need the extra evade. So yeah, I'm not particularly wowed by this card. The next card is Plucky. It is the Survivor Composures that were originally released back in the Echoes of the Past Mythos pack. This one is a free asset that costs 3 experience points, 2 willpower, and 2 intellect skill icons. Its talent and composure traits: fast, limit 1 composure in play, you get +1 willpower and +1 intellect. Non-direct damage / horror must be assigned to Plucky before it can be assigned to your investigator card. Spend 1 resource as a free triggered ability. You get +1 willpower and +1 intellect for this skill test. Again, it's fast, it's free, gives you passive willpower and intellect skill boosts, which I think arguably are some of the best stats in the game if you're looking to deal with the encounter deck as well as just discovering clues, which is really the name of the game. It's got 3 more sanity than the level 0 version of Plucky. So there's some nice soak potential there. You do still have to have a way of keeping the damage off this thing, but leather coat's a thing, and the new heavy furs in the neutral card set's another option. We've liked these new composures, and I think this one is pretty nice as well.
Yeah, this is, I think, the one I've played the most of all the previous ones, particularly an Ashcan Pete card is really good because he has an ally right from the get-go to act as additional soak before you get rid of this card. And yeah, extra willpower and extra intellect is something every investigator wants.
Yeah, I really like this card. And the reason is, I think this is the first card we've seen yet that can actually fight Peter Sylvester for his slot.
But it doesn't have to.
And it doesn't have to. But what it means is that you can take Plucky and you can rely on it for some sanity soak and your willpower boost, which is 2 of the best things Peter Sylvester level 2 provides. And it doesn't take an ally slot, and it's free. and you can spend resources to help you, to boost your ability to you know, take willpower tests. I think that just the fact that it means that it gives a survivor another option from having to go charisma and Peter Sylvester level 2, which I gotta be honest, like 95% of survivor decks are probably going to be playing charisma and Peter Sylvester level 2, and it's just so nice to have finally get another option that can do that thing of giving yourself willpower and provide some sanity soak. So I really like this card.
Yeah, and survivors are like the one class that have the easiest time of keeping these assets alive. So
Yeah.
the fact that it gives you 2 great stats in addition to being in a class that can easily keep it alive is like the cherry on top for me.
Yeah, exactly. The survivor also has Jessica Hyde, and it's nice that Jessica Hyde provides a combat boost. So you've got 3 different stats being covered by just playing Plucky and Jessica Hyde without having to touch Peter Sylvester. Yeah, I really like this card.
Yeah, it opens up some options for survivors to look at some of the other survivor allies, and we've received quite a few of them over the past cycle or so. There's Granny Orr, there's Jacob Morrison, others that you may want to consider in decks. So I agree, it is nice to have that something that replaces or complements Peter Sylvester, depending on how you want to build. Again, like the other composures, this one, if you play it in Yorick, he can also purchase Well Prepared. So he has two willpower skill icons just sitting on the table most of the time, which is pretty nice. And I really like this one as well. How do we rate it? Is it worth an Elder Sign?
I think so. It just has 2 great stat boosts in a class that can easily keep this card alive. It's really solid.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, this is pretty good. I mean, you run leather coats or Jessica Hyde, and you're going to be fine. This card's great. I'll give it an Elder Sign as well.
And it's in a class that generally has the experience to spare.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, I mean, you compare the spending 3 XP for this or spending 3 XP on Fire Extinguisher, and that's pretty... It's not looking good. It's not looking good for Fire Extinguisher, I'm afraid.
See what you did there. I see what you did. Yeah.
So, I'd give this one an Elder Sign as well. I think of the level 0 composures, Plucky probably was one of the more popular ones to begin with. So it doesn't carry some of the baggage that the other ones did, where I think players just simply forgot they existed. They might have actually been good in certain investigators, like we were talking about with Scientific Theory and Joe Diamond. I think as more investigators were released, the composures became more relevant, but players had already forgotten about them by the time those investigators were released, so they didn't see a whole lot of play. I think Plucky was immediately attractive in investigators like Peter Ashcan Pete. So yeah, Elder Sign, it's very good. If you have the XP, I don't think you can go wrong by picking this up. Boosting your willpower and intellect, those are very important, especially if you're not, especially in multiplayer, if you're not necessarily the combat monster of the group. Those 2 skills are going to go a pretty long way to winning you the game. This brings us to the final survivor card in the box. This is Fend Off. It is a 2-cost event that costs 3 experience points, 2 agility skill icons, the Gambit and Trick traits. Fast, play when a non-elite enemy spawns at your location. That enemy attacks you. Then automatically evade that enemy and attach Fend Off to it. Attached enemy cannot ready. We talked a lot about in our reviews of the revised core set, and as well, I think there were a couple cards in this box so far. You mentioned, Matt, that cards designed for the game that Arkham Horror did not become, and I suspect this is another one of those. This feels very much to me like your second playthrough card. You have done your blind run of a campaign, you ran headlong into something that killed you. Your second run through the campaign, you're like, okay, I'm ready for you. I've picked up Fend Off. I have a particular target in mind for this, and I'm going to basically remove it from, or eliminate that problem for the group or in solo just for yourself. What do you guys think?
I'm not a big fan of this card personally. I feel like it just requires too much setup and costs too much for what it does. It's essentially locking down an enemy, which is fine. But when you compare this to something like toe-to-toe, that kind of does the same thing realistically for 0 cost and 0 experience. It's tough. And I get what this card is trying to do. It is nice that it can permanently lock down a certain enemy, but I find that often isn't good enough. Imagine putting this on a Wizard of the Order or something. That's not going to feel great. So you really need a specific target, like you were saying, man, from Lang, that, okay, this enemy's going to show up, I'm going to lock it down, and we won't have to deal with it. But I think aside from that, if you're just kind of using this as a form of enemy management, it's going to be pretty disappointing.
I was actually thinking of this compared to handcuffs. The Guardian card that you don't see very much because it's really specific in its use. Yeah, I think the fact that Fend Off takes the enemy out and it's fast is pretty nice, I have to admit. So you don't spend any actions dealing with it. Where toe-to-toe, you do have to spend the action on toe-to-toe. Yeah, but then again, toe-to-toe is also cost 0, and it's also 0 XP. Yeah, so I guess it's hard to value. A free action just take something off the board. Huh. How would you value that?
How many investigators want this kind of effect? Obviously the two that jump out to mind to me are Calvin and Daniela, but I think later in the game Calvin doesn't really want a card like this because he's already achieved what he's looking to do, which is take a bunch of damage, and he's kind of walking that razor's edge. So later in the game, this card just becomes 2 agility skill icons. And early in the game, I guess it's kind of nice when you're not set up. This can kind of push an enemy to the side and then helps you set up, which can be nice. But I think Calvin has plenty of cards that kind of do that already for him.
What if you thought about it like a kind of like a ward of protection, but just for enemies? What do you think of it then?
I still don't like it.
I do want to admit one use case that I bet you I'm going to throw out there before the internet figures it out and turns it into a meme, and that's the classic Lola Hayes and Stubborn Detective.
You do raise a good point there that this can target weakness enemies, and there are a few of them like Stubborn Detective. I believe Patrice Hathaway has an enemy that you can lock down with this, although generally when I've played Patrice, ignoring it is simply the best option, so better it not enter play at all. But I mean, push comes to shove, you could lock it down with this. I think there's the other one I've seen mentioned is Your Nightmare. That you could lock down with this, but I mean, those are very specific uses. This card seems to me, when I was thinking about it last night, it feels like a very useful tool to deal with a very specific type of enemy, and that is it can only hit non-elites, which is an issue, and it can only hit enemies that spawn at your location, which is an issue, and there are many enemies that don't spawn on you, so this doesn't help. I'm thinking specifically of the Mindless Dancers and Before the Black Throne. This would be perfect for them if they spawned on top of you, but they don't, because they have high fight values and a ton of health, and they're a pain to deal with. So I was sitting down and I was thinking well, what kind of enemy do I want to play this on? And I think you also want an enemy that doesn't hit too hard, but is annoying, because you don't want to take this massive attack from this enemy. And the enemy I came up with was the Conglomeration of Spheres. Hits you for 1 and 1. It's a hunter, so it's going to chase you. And it's got this really kind of annoying ability that's going to nuke your weapon if you use it against a melee weapon. And it's got 6 health, so it's a real pain in the butt to chew through all that health. If you had something like this, the Conglomeration hits the table and ceases to be an issue for the rest of the campaign, or the rest of the scenario. If you're fighting monsters like that, I could see myself taking this. Maybe the deep ones from the Innsmouth Conspiracy also sort of hit that threshold, because Some of them don't hit all that hard. They're hunters. They have really annoying on-engage effects, and survivors tend to lean into evasion more than combat. And so evading deep ones gets really painful after a while because you evade it, you run, it chases you, it catches you, you get the it gets the on-engage effect again. So the ability to just take that enemy out is helpful, but like I said, I think this is a card you're only looking at on your second playthrough of a campaign once you've face planted into some of these enemies and recognize which ones are the bad ones and which ones you can safely kill. How would we rate this one?
So one last comment though, what you mentioned about the conglomeration of spheres. So you also brought up how I had referenced in the past cards that seemed designed for a version of Arkham Horror that did not, that did not happen. Conglomeration of spheres is like the enemy that is common in that game.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's the enemy that you can kill it, sure. It's going to take you a while, and especially with the whole destroying your melee weapon thing, that's an anathema to most guardians, or pretty much most weapons in the game that aren't guns. Who knows? Maybe the Edge of the Earth campaign will feature a lot of conglomeration-like enemies, in which case this card stock goes up. But I will probably only pick up this card on my second playthrough because there's just too many unknowns. You don't know whether it's going to work. You don't know if you're going to get the value out of it. I think one of the bigger problems is that the enemy you want to lock down probably hits pretty hard in the first place. So you've got to take that initial attack, which you probably don't want to do. And so letting it hit the table and then evading it is probably a better option than, say, like if you had to take 2 damage and 2 horror, yikes. That seems too much. I would much rather just deal with it after it hit the table than take that attack, if I was confident that I could deal with it that way. Nate, what do you think?
I'm going to give this thing a tentacle. I find that, even if you have the enemy in mind that you want to lock down, it's also still reliant that you draw this card at the right time before that enemy spawns. And otherwise, this is just a bad manual dexterity, and that's not worth 3 experience.
I think I'm going to give this an other thing because I think it does have its uses. I like the fact that it's fast. So if I look at it as like a ward of protection for enemies, where it's just like I bat it away for 2 resources and I never have to deal with it again. Okay, I think that gets up to Elder Thing level for me. I do think this is really good in Calvin though, because if you have this thing, you bat it away and then the damage and horror is good, then there you go. But that's very specific territory. Yeah, I'd call this another thing because it does what it does pretty well and it doesn't cost actions. So I think that's not bad.
I think I'm going to be a little bit more bullish on this one than you guys and go to a 0 on this. I think I kind of like this ability. I think it's better than, say, a card like Mind Wipe that just blanks enemies. I feel like blanking the enemy for basically a turn or a phase is not very valuable. But if there is a particular or a bunch of non-elite enemies on the table or in the encounter deck that you're really concerned about, this basically removes them from play like a ward of protection. So I could see it being quite valuable. You could also maybe combine this with, can you use Let Me Handle This to grab an enemy off somebody?
I think so.
So maybe Yorick could say, play Let Me Handle This, grab if you're playing in multiplayer, somebody draws that, you don't draw the enemy you want to lock down, but somebody else does. You play Let Me Handle This, you pull it to you, then you lock it down, and you've saved your group a lot of problems.
You could also say the same about On the Hunt, because let's say there's an enemy that is in the deck, like the big fat deep one from Innsmouth Conspiracy with 5 health. With On the Hunt, you can go find it and then lock it without spending any actions. Okay.
So I feel like this has more potential than some of those other odd enemy management tools that we have looked at in the past that we have really not been very generous to in terms of ratings. But this one doesn't feel as bad to me because, with cards like Let Me Handle This and On the Hunt, especially if you can afford, I think is On the Hunt level 3. I don't know if there is an investigator who could take both of those though.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to combo those anyway because the power of On the Hunt level 3 is that you defeat the enemy that you want to defeat and get resources for it.
True.
Yeah.
But I could see, if you know there's something coming, like a conglomeration of spheres like Enemy or a deep one that you want to remove from play, then this is okay. I mean, theoretically, you could use this to deal with the mindless dancers, and before the Black Throne, using that technique, somebody draws a dancer, or you'd have to on the hunt for a dancer, I think, and then use this. The problem is, again, dancers hit pretty hard, and the way that scenario is structured is that the dancers often get shuffled back into the encounter deck anyway, so it's not doesn't work in that scenario. But I feel like there's a little more potential for this one, so I'm willing to be a little more bullish on it at a 0. That's going to do it for our look at the Survivor cards in the Edge of the Earth Investigator expansion. If you've made it this far, well, we're only about halfway through at this point. We still have all of the multi-class cards to deal with, as well as the neutral cards and weaknesses. And those videos will be coming as we record them. As always, let us know in the comments if you agree or disagree with what we say. Do you like Fire Extinguisher? Let us know. We're always interested in hearing your opinions. Any final thoughts on the Survivor cards as a whole in this expansion?
Survivor is made out pretty well overall. Oh, well, I don't think any card really stands out aside from Plucky. There's plenty of cards that I think fill interesting roles within the card pool that, solid.
Yeah, they didn't get anything like really strange to work with. They didn't exactly get true magic, where it's like, what the heck, you got to like really work at it. They had a lot of cards that like they do what they say on the package, and they're pretty fine at it. You've got Plucky, which is amazing. I'm so glad that's in the card pool. But then you also get like Blood Will Have Blood, which is kind of awful. But they did okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I think all of our heads were hurting after our True Magic review, so it's refreshing to have some straightforward cards that basically do what they do, and it's written on the card in plain language, and you don't have to do a lot of mental gymnastics to figure out what they do. I think on the whole, as the card pool has expanded, Survivors have always received a lot of really solid cards that are very useful in situations, and I think that continues here in the Edge of the Earth expansion. I think it remains to be seen whether some cards like Bandages and Fend Off will have a place. It also remains to be seen whether the whole Daniela deck comes together. I think a lot of players' first impressions of Daniela are not going to be very positive, simply because this game has really ingrained in us killing enemies is better than being attacked by them, and so having an investigator that goes against that grain is going to be have an uphill battle. But my experience with her so far has been very positive, and I think there are a lot of very interesting Survivor cards in this box that will work well with her, and I'm looking forward to playing her more. That's going to do it for this episode. If you enjoyed what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. If you need to contact me, I can be reached at manfromlang@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at manfromlang. Until the stars are right, keep your shotgun close and your elder sign closer. Take care out there, and happy investigating.